we have started midday meal schemes, which has which has an access to many children who are otherwise denied of food. But midday meal, giving good meal in the school in absence of potable drinking water and a toilet facility will not fetch any result, number one. So, simultaneously school health, sanitation, all these needs to operate. And in turn, in an adult, of course, we have malnutrition and productivity issue, something that has to be understood. Reduced work capacity and work output because of, household food insecurity. And this both will contribute to having malnutrition, especially amongst childhood and adolescent stage. This, is something that if it is not, sort of rectified, it continues to be a burden not only on oneself, the family, the community, and the country at large. Now, nutrition problem, if you look at, problems are there across all sections of population and everybody, male, female, everybody. But predominantly the vulnerability we see among pregnant women, lactating women, infants, preschool children, adolescent girls, elderly, socially deprived communities, because of lack of access to many basic things, we see this. Now, for me, this is very important. We often try to kind of sort of ignore this issue, because if you really look at consequences of malnutrition, okay, we know that mortality due to infection, malnutrition, or crippled for the rest of their lives, it is actually a big problem. And then also suffer from, if you look at the degrees of malnutrition, it is a burden and it contributes greater burden to the society, adds to the health cost of the nation, a drain in national human resource. Most importantly, many studies have proved that malnutrition negatively impacts GDP as it reduces physical cognitive growth, reduces productivity and earning individuals, and results in economic loss of nation. 3% GDP is lost on account of malnutrition, which has been repeatedly said by different forums. I think ASCI is also one of the earliest organizations who have brought out this report. Now, if you look at scenario in Andhra Pradesh, of course there has not been much, the NMB data clearly talks about, what is the level of chronic energy deficiency among male and female. And again, if you look at children between 10 to 13 years and also 14 to 17 years. If you look at the normal figure, there I don't think, if it's only 57.7% even in case of male, and even in case of female it is only 47.8% normal. And if you look at children 10 to 13, 39%, and 14 to 17%, 62.3%. Just to say that, we have so much of intervention, we have so much of infrastructural support, we have systems built in place, but yet we see its impact has been, not very satisfactory. If you look at the programs per se, nutrition programs per se in Andhra Pradesh, there are many, but I have just culled out a few which have greater implications, which have been well accepted by many of the communities. ICDS, if you look at 380 projects, and NDCCs, there are already 4,200 centers across the state. And then Indram Amrita Hastam scheme, which has started in a few districts, but it has been again well accepted. Girl child protection for the scheme it's actually well known in the community. Midday meal scheme, yes, again. And then Kishori Shakti Yojana, Sabla. All these things, why I put it is, all have some, improvement in terms of nutrition. But conscientiously, or consciously, there has not been looked at from the point of view of databases. Now, however, even in spite of having so many schemes, and if I look at the systems level, I think Andhra Pradesh is the first state which started off ICT in this field much more intensely than the other states. Maybe at the system level, okay, at the program level, there has been some kind of commitment. But still, there are a lot of challenges, because we still see access to food is a challenge in our most remote areas, unreachable areas. It still continues to be a big challenge. Quality nutrition is another. Nutrition, having food is one thing, but what do we want today? That is the question comes to all of us. Do we want just the hunger eradication, or do we want the, the food security, or are we interested in nutrition security? Just hunger eradication, we can eat any junk food and fill up a stomach. Do we want that? Or if we have to say only food security is important, okay, have food which is of poor quality, which may not have all the qualitative aspects and maybe, not safe to eat. Do we want that? Or do we want nutrition security, which also includes quality food plus water and sanitation simultaneously makes the nutrition security, brings out the security in terms of nutrition. So do we want that? Which is not there. Access to potable, as I said, drinking water. So most importantly, access to public nutrition program itself in some of the remote areas are still is far from satisfactory. Now, if you look at the urban scenario, of course, there are some people from the urban area who would also like to know that, the fast food culture has really eroded, that has really damaged the health and well-being of children. Foods rapidly prepared and quickly served, especially in a packaged, or takeaway, because there's no time for mothers to cook, or there's, everything is instant. It has really brought down the quality of nutrition, and some of the stuffs which are not really good for health has become a staple food, like Maggi and other things. Once in a while it's okay, but it has become a staple food for many children. And so instant food, so these are something that has been a cause of concern. So this is something is forgotten story. Now this is where I come. Where is the problem? Is the nutrition on information gap. Maybe at the system level, the government machinery or maybe the other stakeholders, they are able to kind of devise a lot of mechanisms to implement the schemes. But what is at the beneficiary level is something that we wanted to know. So nutrition, basically it's an information gap. So therefore we try to kind of do some kind of an innovation wherein we took up an advocacy strategy more intensely, in addition to what the governments have been doing, in addition to, let's say for example, the review meets are not so difficult these days because we know that electronically certain things are achieved much faster. So the reviews are better, the informations are better, but at the implementers level, but how much has it reached to the beneficiary level? So with all the ICT enabled activity, we still have found that certain information has not reached. So we took up a small example, and I'm not saying it is something worth really getting so much of attention, but we have just started, which has given us some dividends in terms of demanding for certain services. So our innovation, of course, we tried it out in just four villages itself. That's all, as a small example, intensively in an unreached, or what shall I say, where there is a problem in terms of reach, in terms of mobility. So chosen those areas, and we have started looking at the advocacy strategies in terms of what nutritional support that the government is providing, and what is that we can do in order to really bring down the level of infant mortality or maternal mortality, or let us say even improving the child nutritional status. So this was the context that we used, wherein the life cycle approach, which our earlier person was also mentioning, that if we are to really look at the malnutrition, it is an intergenerational issue. From low birth weight to stunted child to the undernourished girl to the undernourished mother, who will again bear an low birth weight baby. It is an intergenerational issue. So if the problem of malnutrition is intergenerational, we say, or we hope, that the solution for the malnutrition is also should be intergenerational. So there cannot be just one small intervention for pregnant mother, just small intervention for adolescent girls, or for the young children. So this advocacy strategy sort of focused on these four critical stages of life, and we focused on these four groups, and we used campaign as a key technique because in addition to the available support from the government programs, we also used a communication strategy, where we took campaigning as a method to corroborate what the government has already been doing for them to understand to understand the importance of the services that are being given to them. Now, what are the objectives of the campaign? See, first of all, we wanted to sort of see that reaching out to families, pregnant, lactating mothers, adolescents and teachers, PRI and community at one critical point was not there. So we use this. Although we have Village Health and Nutrition Day, but it is left to the functionaries at the grassroots level, whether it is Anganwadi worker or ALM, it is left to them. Very few higher level officials go. So it was attended, but the importance was, it still requires more importance. So we thought reaching out all these people at one given point of time and to create an understanding on causes and consequences of malnutrition and to sensitize the community on life cycle issue and approach, and also for making them understand how we can break this intergenerational cycle of malnutrition and to promote home level care and behavior of IYCF, because we feel that as long as you try to keep talking about the schemes, it will remain as a scheme. As long as you use the scheme to empower the community, it will bring in a lot of change in the community. So although the schemes are there, schemes should be an enabler in building the capacities of the individual and not mere giving some services. So and also to support every individual towards advocating the cause in his or her own capacity, whoever be the person who is responsible for that particular cause. Now, how did we go about? We did a need assessment to address these gaps. We compiled a comprehensive database on nutrition support and health facilities in and around the area where we chose, and then we felt that sensitization was needed, that is, need for nutrition as a foundation for life, not necessarily for supplementary nutrition, foundation for life. And we took that as a concept where life cycle was being kind of treated. Then we also tried to look at the stakeholders who can influence. It's, as an outsider we may go and we do a campaign and come back, but we wanted those things to be taken up further. So we identified the stakeholders, we mobilized them, we made them as a part of the key partners in this whole activity. Then capacity building of the stakeholders, mobilizing resources, and we also kind of looked into what are the reforms and policies within the system that is available to be able to address this issue. Then also we kind of gathered the support, political, administrative will, let's say even if it's a village level, it could be panchayat, maybe at that level whoever is the political or the administrative leader, we mobilize them to this cause. And then most importantly, there were simulation exercise to tighten the response. It was a great difficult task for us, because it's not so easy just to get it can be demonstrated. Campaign as a technique can be demonstrated, but what we wanted is people to get influenced by this process, and therefore it was a great task for us. Now, how did we go about? We listed a set of targeted actions directed at decision makers in support of specific cause. In other words, we took only two major issues: child malnutrition issue as a fundamental thing, and nutrition, that is the foundation for life, which we kind of gave a lot of weightage to this concept. And we also try to define the promotion of a cause for influencing the different stakeholders, because otherwise it becomes another kind of a parroting in terms of another exercise. We really wanted the people to understand how serious it is in those inaccessible areas. So therefore we devised a campaign technique for aiming at change in attitude, actions by influencing people and organization, that is, it could be Anganwadi center or sub-center, health center, or even a women dairy cooperative society which was operating very vibrantly. Then structures of different level and betterment of people, and more so women and children. Now basically what our advocacy involved making in favor of nutrition attainment for young children. As I said, although it's in nutrition for life, but certain key issues were given more importance, because as I said, in a life cycle approach, it's the early registration of pregnant mother, expected date of delivery, using Janani Suraksha Yojana's support services, or having continuous health checkups which is required by the pregnant mother, infant and young child feeding practices, and the need for immunization. These are the key information, communications on which we developed communication exclusively on these things, which they were already taking but not knowing why they were taking certain services. A planned communication management, a skillful persuasion, and a strategic action for promoting nutrition to young children was the focus of this entire exercise. Now we also used existing tools, in order to do that. We didn't want to bring another set of material, because this is always we have seen that some will bring a new set of material, and once the intervention is over, they go back and community will kind of be without anything, and the functionaries will feel helpless. So we decided, with the available material of the systems, government material we used, and existing tools like Mother-Child Protection Card was used intensely, and then also a calendar and an ISC material of MWCD. This is a calendar which is meant for the functionaries to use it. All the messages, key messages were there, and then ISC material of Ministry of Women and Child Development on pro bono services of celebrity standing on malnutrition, which is, I'm sure all of you are familiar, where Mr. Amir Khan is a part of this entire exercise, and the messages have been coming every day. 1 or 2 key messages are coming. But what we did, we linked those messages with this, because there is a kit, it has got all the messages, there is a CD, and we use this, and they were able to link the messages what they were seeing from the other channels as well. And in the campaign, we did a lot of other brainstorming exercise from the community, from the mothers, for them to take certain decisions. As I said, consistent advocacy actively supported the cause, and tried to get others to support as well, because if one mother was convinced, one father was convinced, or one male youth was convinced, he would bring 10 more people. So that was the response that we got. Why advocacy was needed? As I said, that advocacy being a critical component for ensuring optimal program outreach and services, we thought this is the only thing, not necessarily introducing some new initiative. It is already there. Systems are already in place. Services are already available. To what extent we make the community demand for those services was our objective. So we thought this is the best method, and envisaged a safe and reassuring environment for vulnerable population to access the services, and advocacy also enabled in seeking information that empowered mothers with necessary skill to cope with challenges. Now, actually, who did we use to advocate? Okay, I'm sure everybody is doing, but we gave a different connotation to them, which helped them to kind of wear a new shirt to use the same message. It's actually the women and child development functionaries. It could be Anganwadi workers, it could be ICDS supervisors, it could be ANM, it could be ASHA, and some civil society organization people who are a part of this. Men, women, we use men more, in the community, because being the decision makers at the community level or at the house, in their own houses, so we use them adequately. And then SHG members and opinion leaders within the group, persons who influence others to support the idea and issue, and basically all those who could lobby with us for policy issues, for program issues, and also people who cared about the community were part of this initiative. Now, as I already said, it involved advocacy, involved analyzing the environment, what are the services available, and if the services were available, whether it was well within the reach, was it difficult for them to access it, or whether they were forced to take this. These are the considerations we kind of had while planning, and we drew the agenda how we were going to do it, very clearly spelled out. We also identified the partners who are going to be with us for this entire exercise, and lobbying for the lobbying the support for decision makers, forming friends and and for allowing our support, establishing lot of networks we established. And so basically these are some also what are the adversaries that addressing the concerns of adversaries. This is something that we had expected, so we kind of built how we are going to do those. Essentially 3 more points I'd like to say. Now if you look at the skills that helped us to kind of take this advocacy very seriously, is one is a positive attitude. One is a positive attitude and the patience. See, just because it's a government program, yes, there is a tendency to say, kuch nahi hota, that's the kind of a thing. But we wanted to reverse that thinking. So positive attitude and patience, thinking skills, social skills and negotiation skills, this is definitely required for effective advocacy. And credibility of the person, as I said, like a role model, we did have within our own self, but we also added this Amir Khan's thing to the thing, because that's how the ministry started off, using 5-6 messages. And today we do see people have been accepting it, because it's, I'm not saying otherwise they were not, but some kind of a credibility to the messages have got very well accepted. Now, actually what worked for us? Okay, some of the basic context which we needed really had, being gracious to receive a lot of criticism helped us. Obviously, they will say, what is so special? They're already, VHND day is already there. Okay, VHND day, it is there. Services are given. It is a very good, a forum. But, we wanted to strengthen that VHND component, VHND day, and therefore, we had used this. But criticism, of course, we had expected, but we were quite gracious to accept whatever they said, and being professional, not spoke negative things about anything, because there were a lot of people who were against this as well. Then we were being very focused helped us. We were very clear about the support from the expected stakeholders. Some promised and did not match up to the expectation, and we needed to do a prior homework and prepared the rationality, which is the most important thing, which we often sort of compromise on. And then we also needed to consider ourselves as an information source, because otherwise again it will give us a picture that simply they're coming and doing another drama, which we didn't want that. Okay, so the authority with which this was conducted was helped to take this process in a very useful way. And telling the truth helped. Telling the truth helped, and results of misleading information. Why I am saying this is, now if you look at all the maternal child health issues, whether it is Janani Surashya scheme, whenever there is a cash transfers, there is a tendency to kind of expect more, and just to get the attention of the community, the workers also try to tell certain other things which are not to be, that kind of false information should not be given. So these are the priorities that we took up. And for well-coordinated advocacy, effort was also needed to know who else was more helpful to us. As I said, the panchayats, definitely, members of the panchayat, initially they said what is that they are going to do, but finally they slowly started coming up more openly. The opposition had to be known. The campaigners were not afraid to admit their lacuna, as I said. We also curtailed giving too many messages, but were specific, like what I am doing. We didn't do that. We gave only few messages. Then followed up for positive responses, and updated and informed on latest development, because as I said, there are additional schemes like for ICDS, for mother and child. As I said, it is intergenerational issue. Sabla scheme is added where adolescent girl gets health and nutrition support. So it's actually, if you look at, a child gets, an adolescent girl gets, and a pregnant mother gets, a lactating mother gets. So it is a, and within the system that life cycle can operate very well. So, but whatever is the latest reforms that were made known to the entire group, then allowed the channel of communication to open for the future, because we can't be sitting there and doing all the time. We opened up, and what did it happen finally? Outcome was, it created a demand for public nutrition service. All this while we had to dump the services. We had to dump. Iron and folic acid tablets, please take it. Actually what was happening, the reality is, iron and folic acid tablets, because early registration we say, even in spite of saying early registration, the tablets would reach a mother only at the 7th month. if you really look at the, if the hemoglobin level is poor, the bone marrow formation begins at the 6th week at the fetal stage. So if you give iron, as it is, the mother may be deficient of it. If you give in 7th month, already the damage has occurred. So these are some information that we started telling them. So the demand for these at an early stage became much more, intense. So enabled functionaries to mobilize the community in a better manner because it did help them or during their later stage in the Health and Nutrition Day. Then build the confidence in the community on the programs. This is what we wanted. It's not that we just did another drama. It was just that, we wanted people to realize it's something very serious and they needed to do it. And initiative was a push factor for convergence of services. Although now, say for example, in Andhra Pradesh, you do have many convergent program. Now you started. But at the implementers level you've been having. But at the people's level, we still, at the beneficiary level, we need to have some more. And then visibility to issue generated support within the family. And most importantly, as I said, it did not just, went off as a scheme, but it empowered women, indeed have become a true advocates that befitted the purpose of our campaign. So just to say that we felt that in that short notice, in the short initiative, we were able to kind of bring unmatched potential to this society who could really take care of the thing. I think I'll end it here. Thank you. And if there are any questions, I'll answer.
Yes, please. Can you come forward? Can anyone circulate a hand mic?
Yeah, I'll use this one. Yeah, it's okay. Okay.
Good morning, madam.
Yeah.
In the recent papers I read, the effect of junk food on fertility.
Effect of?
The effect of junk food on fertility.
Okay.
So do you have statistics to corroborate that? This is one. And the other question is, I watched one program on BBC and there it is given, semen count is declining year by year. So is it related to nutrition problem? And the other one is regarding the colostrum.
Okay.
And I saw the message from American. The importance of colostrum is not given. And the colostrum is very important for immunization, for immunity. And it does contain IgM and IgA antibodies, and which are very important in the infant.
Yeah.
And why that missed? So these are the three,
fine.
and I want to have.
Of course, colostrum is very important. That's what, we have been pushing that and people have not been still, I think it's about 3 decades since we have been talking about it. We continue to have that because there are certain belief system that still prevails. But I think if you really take, there has been a progress. It's not so, it is not so bad as it was 3 decades back. Today, if you really look at it, because the institutional deliveries have also supported, an initiation of early breastfeeding, which is, starts with the colostrum, has been in practice. So there has been an good progress in that. Now, junk food part. Junk food, it very, very clearly says, junk food really is a junk in terms of, if you look at the components that it has, okay? It is, it is not good for the system, be it, the preservative that is used, or be it, it's empty calories. Let's say Coke. Basically, it's an empty calorie. Okay, or your Maggi noodles. We know that it is bad because it is made. If you look at the base, it's a maida. Okay, refined atta, refined maida. Now, any refined maida consuming for for continuously, it definitely affects the colon. Colon cancer is known to be for these things. So, junk food, you take any junk food, whether it is empty calories, which has these beverages, or these, junk food, other thing which is based on refined atta, refined oil, refined sugar. Yes, these are definitely harmful because of the component that it has, which is not suitable to our body. If it is once in a way, if one takes it, is okay. But if that becomes a staple food, definitely it is bad for the system. And the third question is, yes, it's very, as he said, hypothetical. Definitely, I am not certain about it. I think we can ask one of the doctors who's present here can answer that. I'm sorry.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sir, thank you very much for your informative and useful lecture. But here,
Oh, yes.
It's on already.
that is, few years back in AP, the lecturers were given an assignment of conducting micro-level survey.
Okay.
So you were asked to go to villages and conduct survey. So in that micro-level survey in Kannur district, where I was there, we found on the survey that most of the young women's death are due to the pregnancy-related problems caused due to this malnutrition. That was found in the survey.
True.
So on the other hand,
Yeah.
you are finding in the urban areas, that is rural-urban gap is there though.
Correct.
In rural areas, that is malnutrition. In the urban areas, it is
Overnutrition, obesity.
oriented food or fast foods, all these things relate, giving rise to obesity, something like that. So, in bridging this gap between urban and rural gap, any NGOs are playing any role?
There are some good NGOs which are starting it, even for the urban health. But you know what happens? If you look at the percentage, we still have undernutrition, children dying because of malnutrition, so we're still focusing on that. It doesn't mean that the other side is not required, but if you look at the percentage, it's still low. But there are some, NGOs which are, predominantly looking into these urban scenario and especially obesity. A child of 8 years having an, diabetes, juvenile diabetes was there earlier, but now you see in a different setup. Obesity associated with diabetes, associated with some kind of a cardiovascular problem. There has been, a lot of, medical interventions in medical colleges have taken. Like say, for example, St. John's Medical College, they have a field unit. They have been doing a lot of these work, but in a very small way. But as you said, it is a problem. It is going to catch up if we don't alarm, and if we were not cautious today, that will become a big burden to the entire country.
Right, sir.
Sir.
Madam,
Yes, sir.
you are time and again referring to Amir Khan. In one of the ads, the message is that just born child for 6 months mother's milk should be given. Other than mother milk is will lead to malnutrition. That is the message that we get. Is it correct? That is one question. Next one is, the falling of flora is directly related to intake of alcohol. I have seen in one of the British journals. In another journal, it is totally contradicted that a limited quantity of alcohol will not affect the falling of flora at plus 50 age group. That is next question, madam. And another one is, in Western countries, other than this mother's milk, just born children, other than mother milk is promoted. One standard company supplies standard milk to children, especially in the USA, I have seen it. Why don't we implement same method here for free of cost to just born babies till the age of 6 months? That is next.
Okay. See, one thing is, I still feel that, the first question that you said, we say exclusive breastfeeding till 6 months. It's a must, provided you follow certain norms which a pregnant mother should have, her pre-pregnancy stage, what it is, how she is, what is her nutritional status. It all supports her as well as the child. What we say is, exclusive breastfeeding is enough for the child to kind of take care of its requirement. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that you have to ignore mother at the cost of the child. It has to go hand in hand, number one. And secondly, that microflora point that I try to raise is, see, we do not give importance because as much as we talk about the intake, we are supposed to be also giving importance to the body waste to be removed from the body. Okay, that part we do not talk, number one. And secondly, the growth of those bacteria. You know, if you look at, today if you look at, there are lot of doctors here, I stand to get corrected if I am wrong. You know, especially those mothers who have cesarean, this process is entirely taken away. You know, because, you know, when there is a cesarean delivery, this is what the Lancet clearly gives, that when there's a cesarean delivery, what happens, that transferring of that flora, microflora to the child's thing does not happen, and therefore this child is again, you know, it's a neglect, and it is an abuse to the child. So we, you know, there are some basic things which are not made known to the thing, because now today in malnutrition, if you are really talking, as much as intake is important, we need to talk about the excretion part of it, which enables the metabolic process to be supportive to the body. In that context, I said. And the third thing that you said was on, no, yeah. See, why should we go in? See, we should, as much as, okay, there is no need, I think the mother's milk is good enough, provided you take care of her. Mother Nature, you take care of her, that she will take care of the thing. One thing that I wanted to say, which I forgot to mention, that today, you know, malnutrition is also multidimensional, because we do not give importance to horticulture, agriculture. There. Fisheries, animal husbandry, they are all operated independently. But do we have one objective for them to kind of support nutrition? Is something that sectoral issues have to be taken care, number one. Secondly, if you have to really improve human nutrition you cannot improve out of thin air. If my nutrition has to improve, my plant nutrition has to be good. The animal nutrition has to be good. If plant nutrition has to be good, then the soil nutrition has to be good. So it is an environmental issue. It's not something different. At the cost of damaging the environment, human nutrition cannot be achieved. Only probably in the synthetic form you may get it, and that synthetic form, it does not last in the body. It cannot store in the body. Sorry, sir.
So one question.
Yeah.
Quick last question.
Ma'am, I'm Preeti and I'm doing my PhD in communication. I mean, your presentation sort of brought into focus some elements of communication in the campaign and all of that. I'm working on community media, which I think is a very important component of the media landscape, communication landscape. I was wondering if you could, give some inputs on what kind of communication systems exist at the community level. And also, I'd also like you to reflect a little bit on indigenous knowledge forms in terms of health and nutrition.
Indigenous, very good. See, what we said, there are certain things which were not focused. For example, I'll tell you, it may sound very, it may sound very stupid at this point of time. The basic information like, say, for example, skipping a breakfast or skipping a first meal in the morning, because there is no time or there is ignorance or there is, there is no support. What happens? And the last meal when it is taken highly nutritious with all nutrient content, everything is there. The last meal that is taken at the supper, it may be very nutritious, it may have everything, but the absorption is not even 30%. But the first meal what you take, no matter how much it may be very small, just a rice and a sambar or whatever it is. The first meal what you take in the morning, 90% get absorbed. I mean, this is a basic message. See, our school children, for example, school, college, or all of us for that matter, there's no time in the morning, we skip. What happens? We skip and we take one small dabba. Okay, and that is not enough. At least if lunch is quite sumptuous, it's okay. But we try to take. So what happens? We, at the night, no matter how much you take, it does not help the body. There is something called biological clock in the body. People are not aware of it. These small things which we try to say. For example, this, how they should protect the soil condition for the plants to grow, and the plant nutrition can enhance the human nutrition. This aspect was very, very well appreciated. As I said, in my study, we had a lot of women from women dairy cooperative societies. For them, they just took it out because for them, it's the cattle on which they're living, the milk, they're basically milk vendors. They put it, they kind of pour it to the society. They took it very seriously, and plant nutrition to animal nutrition to human nutrition. That concept, in terms of their own language, they brought in, some innovations. Like, for example, the fodder is grown in their own area for feeding the cattle. Okay, till such time, they did not give importance even to the smallest thing of that. It's a wild grass, so it grows on its own. There is no need. But the moment we started insisting, and then they saying this, they thought the cow's milk yield will go. So they understood, and they started, having some kind of innovation even with those weeds. So things like, there were so many small little things which are there. I can definitely give you, and if you are able to take it, it's good enough. Thank you. Sorry, sir.
I think already people have adjourned for coffee break, but before we break, we thank Dr. Tara for an excellent presentation. And I'll just sum up here, there is a chronic neglect of the girl child culturally, unfortunately, a country like ours, because the girls have been the last and the least to eat, and the early marriage, early pregnancy, early mating, early pregnancy, shorter inter-pregnancy interval have all contributed to this scenario of malnutrition. There have been an excellent study by Narangwal group, Johns Hopkins, long back. It's called, the title of the study was Nutrition and Infection itself. I'll draw your attention to that. I won't take much long. I would like to say so many new facets and facts of nutrition, but suffice it for this time that we will certainly answer some questions. She will be very happy to answer the questions during the break. Now I hand over to Mr. Gopinath.
Thank you, madam. Now we will break for tea and we will reassemble at 11:45.
Revolutionized the concept of ophthalmology in the world. So as a world-renowned personality, how privileged to listen to her. But before she starts speaking, oh, they removed the chairs. It is my proud privilege to introduce you so that you can all have an idea of what a person you are going to listen to. Madam Nachar is 3 years senior to me, so it is a privilege as an youngster when compared to her to introduce her. She has had a distinguished academic career. Starting from her graduation, she passed out in 1962, did the diploma in ophthalmology in 1965 when I passed out of medical college. Then she did MS in 1969, and she did fellowship in ophthalmic pathology with Dr. David Apple in 1973, and she did fellowship again, one more fellowship in ophthalmic pathology and neuro-ophthalmology in 1978. From Harvard University, Boston, USA. And her specializations are cataract surgeries and neuro-ophthalmology. She has had wide experience starting from 1965 when she served as an assistant surgeon in the eye department of the government Erskine. At that time it was called Erskine Hospital, now it's called Rajaji Hospital, Madurai. Assumed the position of assistant professor in ophthalmology in Madurai Medical College, Madurai in 1969. And worked as an assistant professor in neuro-ophthalmology. She had fellowships in ophthalmic pathology at the University of Illinois in Chicago from March 1972 to 1973 under the guidance of Dr. Apple. From 1973 to 77, she worked as an assistant professor in neuro-ophthalmology in Madurai Government Hospital, and from then on until 1978, she did her fellowship in neuro-ophthalmology. After that, she became a medical officer at Arvind Eye Hospital at Madurai, founded by her illustrious brother. She was an adjunct associate professor of ophthalmology, Abraham Lincoln School of Medicine, University of Illinois, Chicago, from 1981 for 1 year. From 82 to 88, she was reader in ophthalmology at the Arvind Eye Hospital, and she was professor of ophthalmology at the same hospital from 1989 onwards. And she became the joint director, now she is an emeritus vice chairperson of the Arvind Eye Care System. She has an array of publications. She wrote a textbook on neuro-ophthalmology, a book on anatomy of the eye. She published a new third edition of the neuro-ophthalmology. She wrote a book on small incision cataract surgery, an alternative technique to instruments, phacoemulsification along with CD and video. 3 hours video cassette she has helped in preparing, and advanced techniques in intraocular lens microsurgery. And then she also wrote articles on current techniques in small incision cataract surgery, etc. She won a number of awards as can be expected. She was awarded the Dr. Rustam Ranji Oration Gold Medal, instituted by the Andhra Pradesh State Ophthalmic Society at Kurnool. She received the Joseph Jnanadikkam Memorial Oration Award at 37th Annual Conference of the Madras State Ophthalmological Association. She received the first Prevention of Blindness Merit Paper Award for presenting a paper on model for high quality large volume cataract surgery in developing countries. She received the Best Medico-Social Worker Award from the Andhra Pradesh Academy of Sciences. She was awarded for the Sake of Honor Award by the Rotary Club of Madurai and Lifetime Achievement Award from the Lions Clubs. And she received the Netra Seva Ratna Award by the Lions Club, Pollachi, in 2000. She received Veera Bahu Memorial Ophthalmic Oration Award by the Indian Medical Association, Thoothukudi. She received the Doctor's Day Award from Indian Medical Association. She also received the Netra Darshini Award by the Rotary Club of Trichy and Srirangam. Received the Mehra Award by the Indian Alumni Group of London. And then she received, she was a member of the Neurosurgical, she is a member of various societies, and including the member of the Neurosurgical Society of India. She is a consulting editor for the Journal of the Neurological Society of India for Neuro-Ophthalmology. She is the managing editor of Kannoli, which is Eye Light, in Journal of Arvind Eye Hospitals, and she is a member of the syndicate of the Manonmaniam Sundaranath University. Very recently, and she received the doctorate, the Doctor of Science, DSc, honoris causa, in the hands of Abdul Kalam. And she is a great personality, coming from an illustrious family, as I told you, a doyen of the profession. She is also interested not only in medical science, which is very normal to expect, but she is an expert in oro farming. There is a huge 80-acre area in Arvind where there is a big manufacturing facility which is called Oro Lab. And adjunct to that, she has been raising the nutritious food, which we had a session before, and she has been instrumental in treating not only treating the patients, but also taking care of the nutrition. And she has been given, as I already told you, the Forsake of the Honor Award from the Lions Clubs, from District 324A, and for the Sake of Honor Award from Rotary Pondicherry as well. So, in fact, I was also associated with Arvind in the past. I was introduced wrongly by saying that I am now. No, I was the Director of Projects at Arvind. So I had a close association with Madam, and she is a very kind personality, though exteriorly she appears a little strict to everybody, but she is the kindest of the person which I have seen, and helped develop, along with his brother, a monument, beginning with 11 beds in a rented setup at Madurai. Now it is more than about 4,000 to 5,000 beds spread all over the country, and beginning from a humble approaches and beginnings, now it is an icon for ophthalmology in the world. Only the tribute should have been that it should become an ophthalmic university first in the world, but unfortunately it is taking a little more time. With those words of introduction, I got great pleasure in inviting Professor G. Nachyar to deliver her lecture.
Thank the entire organization of SIPS, and especially Mr. Chakrabani Garu for inviting me to this wonderful 2-day workshop. And I'm very happy to share. It's not the model that I'm going to share today. It's the ideas in any aspect, whether it is education or a nutritional problem or a health problem, how this idea could be inoculated in every one of us when we start something new or when we want to improve something. Basically, I come from a very, very remote village. My parents are farmers. It seems about 300 years back, we were migrated from Andhra. The whole, there's a big community there in Tamil Nadu, so which we talk now Telugu with contaminated in other languages. So I'm very, very proud to be here. And the reason I'm told that I'm a farmer's family, which I will let you know at the end of my talk. Today, the model which I'm going to talk, please don't take it as only for an eye care. It's not the professional model which I'm going to share with you, but it's mostly an attitude. Yesterday, I asked one madam, said, what is the relationship between the patient and the doctor? Why there is whatever system you develop, ultimately the attitude of every person like us, not related to education. So this attitude, sharing knowledge, helps us whatever we do. Now today, Dr. Venkateswamy is the founder of the whole system. And I'm very fortunate, he's my eldest brother. And it's almost like a father to me, a mentor to me, and also I'm a true disciple to him. His vision, he retired from the government service at the age of 58. A man at the age of 58, crippled with rheumatoid arthritis, a bachelor, a very seriously psoriatic patient from a rustic village. Our village is very, very small village. So person has never been elevated on that line. So what he decided was, now that I'm retired at the age of 58, I don't have a family, what will I do? He had two options in his life. One, we were all attached to Sri Aurobindo Ashram Pondicherry and Swami Vivekananda. My father was a very strong disciple of Swami Vivekananda, and he was a freedom fighter. My house in the village doesn't have a Gandhiji picture, but has a big Vivekananda picture in the front. And we were attached to Sri Aurobindo Ashram. That's how we have named our hospital as Aurobindo Eye Hospital. In Tamil Nadu, it's called Aurobindo Eye Hospital. So when Dr. Venkateswamy retired at the age of 58, there were not, what will he do? There were two options. One, to go and join Aurobindo Ashram and be a devotee. The other one, to start up a center for eye care for poor people. And our family is a farming family, not a poor family, but middle class, but farming family cannot talk about in lakhs and all. All we had was about 5 pairs of bull and cows and a few acres of land. So I don't think we were rich enough to start an institution, but his idea was much, much more richer. What he wanted was, how can I eliminate needless blindness by providing high quality, high volume, compassionate eye care? Because I'm a single person, I want to give this is my dream. But nothing was there in front. Like most of us have got a dream, how do we improve education? How do we improve nutrition of our family? So that is the dream. So how to make this dream into a reality is difficult, but at the same time it is possible. So this was his dream. So he was working all around that dream. And then he said, I just want to share some of the real elements regarding blindness. If you take blindness in the whole world, there are 40 million people are there, out of which 12 million are in India. And the worst part, 2 million are children. When you think of blindness, it's not only the eye part. There's a blindness, it's almost, the tragedy is next to death. If you have a death in the family, the first day the sorrowness is 150%, then comes to after a month, you start accepting it. But if you imagine a child who is blind in a family, your daughter or your son or your grandchild, it's a death every day by looking at the person. It's not only the person is blind, The family is totally sort of cramped into sorrow, lack of financial help, lack of support, and somebody to take care of the baby or take care of the child or take care of the individual. And the another interesting thing, when a small child becomes blind, the number of blinding years are more. For example, madam was talking about nutrition. When a child of about 5-year-old becomes not healthy, you are not developing a good citizen for the country. So similarly, when a boy of 10-year-old is blind, the rest of the years he is going to die at the age of 70. So 60 years of blindness, imagine 12 million into 60, 2 million into 60, which will disturb the whole economy of the country. So it's a very, very serious problem. A deaf and dumb can work, like another persons can do, but a blind man, he himself cannot work. He cannot allow others to work if he's a young person. So this is a tragedy. And the beauty of it, or the good aspect of this, 80% of this 12 million can be cured, which is a very good news. So how do we do? The majority of that cataract surgery, which is very, very simple. A cataract is like graying a hair or wrinkling of the skin. As you grow, it is not a disease, it is a degeneration, can be easily cured. The other aspect is like 2.4, a pair of spectacles can take care. So 7.5 into add to 2.4, it becomes almost 10. So another 2 million, it's okay. But somebody has to think, analyze the blindness part into two components and the rest of it. So when you can take care of the cataract by doing a simple surgery, why not we do something to eliminate this blindness? But again, like nutrition, we have lot of challenges. Lot. One, I don't know whether I'm having cataract. How do I know that I have a cataract, I can be operated? How do I know that I have a refractive error, whether I can get a pair of glasses and see? I thought it's a destination, my child is blind because God is said. There are so many issues. One, yes sir, I know it can be cured. Where do I see the doctor? And where do I see a compassionate doctor? And how will they treat me when I don't have money? And where is it? These people are all educated in the high-fi buildings. Will they look at me? That fear, that lack of barriers, all those aspects make eye care very, very difficult. Either due to lack of finance, or due to lack of awareness, or due to lack somebody is not taking me there, or when I go there, the OP is closed, especially the government situation, so good. The doctors are excellent, but the OP hours are till 10 o'clock in the morning. However early you start from a village, how can you reach at 10 o'clock? By the time you go there, it's closed. Come next day. Come next day, so it's a very inexpensive, it's a free, but then who will pay the travel cost? Who will pay the travel accompanying cost? So there are so many hindrances which Dr. Venkatasamy had in mind. So, this is Dr. Venkatasamy. In a developing country like ours, with competing demands are so much. Health there, defense is there, nutrition is there, medical is there. I alone cannot take away a lot of funding. So what he thought was, why not we supplement the government by doing little more help so that government can spend the rest of the money was that. That time he was very perseverance. He went and met Indira Gandhi, and they made a national program, and when he was in government service, the program was installed. But when he retired, there was nobody to look at him. Nobody was there. He was all alone. Then he called us. We were, two of the family members were doctors, and he said, why not you all join with me so that we will start a small center. So we started, this is a building, rented building, started with 11 beds. The garage of the building was used as a free hospital, and the main building was used as the main thing. But today, when your attitude, when you work hard, when your dreams are true, you can achieve. Everything can be achieved. I really want to congratulate Chakrabani Garu. Maybe in another 10 years, all these sharing the innovations the best practices across. When a TV channel says how to make a sambar through a cook, so many people learn, why not we share our best practices so that we can all learn whatever the best practices there in the world. Today, in 2013, we have 57 centers. We didn't have much money. I'll tell you the story a little later. Today we have 5 tertiary care center, 5 secondary care center, 6 outpatient care center, and 41 primary rural center. So totally 57 centers. So how did he approach? One idea was he wanted to eliminate. He is a doctor. Myself, my husband, we were doctors. My husband's sister and her husband, they were ophthalmologists. So we were 5 people, and one of my brother was an engineer. So he was willing to build a hospital. We went to the bank for getting a loan, and I'm talking, this is 1971, and Dr. Venkatasamy, when you look at him, he was not very appealing, not a very charismatic factor, a man at the age of 58. He couldn't walk properly, so he used to have a walking stick. Even nobody was there to give a seat for him to sit. I'm sharing this because any good work, there will not be support for you initially. Whether to build a temple or to build a school, you cannot expect that's a deal. All you have is strong vision in your heart or dedication in your mind. So how do I do my eye care, or how do I eliminate eye care on a patient perspective? I am willing to do it free. But what are the challenges patient has it? So how do I reach the patient first? How do I make it affordable for the patient? And how do I bring quality? Because when I do something free, the people are a little suspicious. Maybe it's not very high quality. So how do I consciously bring quality? And then how can I become viable? Because there is no donation in Aravind Eye Care system. So I have to be viable. I have to make little money for expansion. All these 57 centers, the money we earned by charging 50 rupees per patient only. So our mantras were, we will reach more people, high volume, and the hard work brought all these things. The first creating access was doing eye camps. The eye camps are done, planned 1 year ahead. We select quite a populated area. We select Kalyana Mandapams or schools, and switch off. And about 500 patients used to come, depends, like 500 or 5,000, depending upon the population area. And this is well planned ahead. From a village, we decided 2 things. One, we won't give much importance to higher education for a lower work. We must have a basic education. All we need is these girls are compassionate because we are going to operate free patient. So we selected all our employee, 95% of our employee from the rural area. And today we are having 4,000 employees, 96.5 are women. I strongly feel, I'm sorry for the men, I'm not saying that men are not the thing. The real thing was, our villages are all very poor villages. High school was the highest education. So most of our nursing care, about 80% of them, we did with those girls. And they had much more, they were not contaminated. You should not mistake me, not contaminated. Oh, it's not going. It's not on, run bananolla. So we do the registration. The thing is, we involve the community a lot. So the community do the advertisement, the community does the registration, because the patients trust the community than the doctors. And these girls, the girls with the white saree are all our, we call them ML